Hello, I am Tammy Marshall, and today I'm going to share with you the first chapter. I've already shared the prologue of my sixth novel called Her Ride or Die. It's a paranormal mystery. So if you haven't yet listened to the prologue, you can go back and do that if you would like. But this is going to be chapter one, and it is titled, Have You Lost Your Mind, Mom? They said she was too old for a bike. Of course, they didn't mean the kind with pedals and a flower adorned wicker basket wired to the handlebars, because if they did, she'd be the first to agree. No, they meant she was too old for a real bike, the kind that menacingly roared and rattled the window panes in the houses she passed, even as it purred seductively in her soul. They all laughed at her when they first saw her ride up to the school on her newly purchased Harley Davidson Fat Boy. Can you believe it? They whispered behind her back as she passed them in the halls on her way to her office. Principal McFarley bought a hog. No way. She's too old. What is she, like 80? She was 50, but she understood their confusion since they were teenagers. And to a teen, anyone over the age of 25 is ancient and ought to be euthanized for the benefit of everyone else, meaning, of course, other teenagers. Sadly, though, it wasn't only teenagers who said she was too old. She heard it from her younger staff, parents of her students, fellow churchgoers, and even the man who sold her the bike had eyed her uncertainly at first. Above all, though, she heard it from her own family. Have you lost your mind, Mom? Her 22-year-old daughter, Angelica, looked at her aghast. She'd decided to break the news to her daughter and to her parents at the same time over supper at their favorite Italian restaurant. Josephine, Joe, McFarley donned her reading glasses so she could nonchalantly study the label of the wine bottle beside her, shrugged, and then sucked a piece of spaghetti off her fork. Pretty sure I have lost my mind after 27 years spent working with kids. She peered at her daughter over her glasses. But what's that got to do with it? Angelica regarded her mother with a stunned expression and then turned to her grandparents for support. Seriously, Pops, she's going to kill herself on that thing. Talk some sense into her. Joe turned her over the glasses look from her daughter to her father, who returned it with one of his own. They held each other's gaze for a minute and then burst into raucous laughter. Angel, you know better than to ask your grandfather to control your mother. He never could tell her no, and that's why she was the hellion that she was. This remark was made with a weary sigh by a stoop shouldered woman who was dabbing at the lipstick that had smeared around her puckered lips while she ate. Joe sighed. She shot her mother a side eye glance. For the millionth time, Mother, being stopped twice in 4 years for speeding does not a hellion make. Must you be so overdramatic? She raised her wine glass and downed the rest of its contents. Her mother frowned and looked pointedly at the carafe of ice water sitting in the middle of the table. She audibly harumphed as her daughter refilled her glass from the wine bottle. I'll stop being overdramatic when you decide to act your age, dear. Josephine's father, Gerald Moyner, cut in before a battle broke out between mother and daughter. Ladies, let's not forget why we're here tonight. He raised his glass toward his wife. Happy birthday, sweetheart. Angelica joined in. Yes, happy birthday, Gram Gram. Josephine noticed that her daughter made a point of using her left hand to lift her glass high into the air, even though she was right handed. She chortled softly to herself, but not softly enough. Something funny, Mom? Angelica asked, her eyes narrowing. She started to shake her head, but then she changed her mind. Her own daughter and mother were so quick to ridicule her, so why not return the favor? Couldn't help but notice how you're showing off that big rock every chance you can get, that's all. Angelica colored, and for that Josephine felt chagrined, until her daughter said, At least I have a man in my life. Even her prim 70-year-old mother sucked in her breath at that comment, and Josephine sensed that one or both of her parents were about to say something, so she raised her hand to ward off their comments. She fixed her daughter with a stare that said more than words could say, and she let her eyes bore into her daughter's until the younger woman looked down at her plate and mumbled, "I'm sorry, Mom. That was uncalled for." Joe nodded. Yes, it was. She took a shaky sip of wine before adding, "And I'm sorry for being snide about your engagement ring. You know I think it's beautiful, just like you are." Angelica looked up, tears brimming, and whispered, "Thanks, Mom." "And where is Thomas this evening, dear?" Virginia Moyner asked her granddaughter. Josephine felt her back teeth grind together in irritation. She specifically told her mother not to ask about Thomas tonight. He and Angelica had argued, and he'd gone off to sulk a while with his buddies. He's busy," Angelica mumbled. "Well, that's too bad that he couldn't join us," her grandmother continued, oblivious to the meaningful looks emanating from her own daughter. "Maybe he could help talk some sense into your mother, since your grandfather is of no use." Angelica laughed in a tittering fashion and turned her attention back to her mother. "No kidding. What possessed you to buy a motorcycle, Mom?" Joe studied the faces of the three people who she cared about most in the world and who should care most about her. She read disbelief on her daughter's face, distaste on her mother's, and perhaps a touch of envy on her father's. Finally, she said, "I've been thinking about getting one since your father left." Angelica sucked in her breath at the mention of the man who had abandoned them both. "That was 13 years ago, Mom. Why now? Why didn't you get one then?" Josephine shrugged. "Lots of reasons. I had you to raise. I didn't have the money to get one. I was a little afraid that I might do exactly what you are worried I'll do and go off and kill myself. And then where would that have left you?" "With us," her mother interjected. Joe shot her mother a look. "Gee, thanks. You were pretty quick to take up on raising my child." Virginia sniffed. "Well, if you'd been stupid enough to get yourself killed on a bike, then I would have had to step in and take care of my only grandchild now, wouldn't I?" She rolled her eyes. "Yes, mother, but I didn't get one then, and I'm certain Angelica can take care of herself now." She looked at her daughter. "Honey, it's been a dream of mine for years. I ignored it at first for practical reasons, and then I ignored it for the past few years because I sort of felt the same way that you three feel right now, that I was too old for it. But then one night it hit me. I'm only as old as I let myself feel. I realized that if I didn't get a bike now, right now, then I wouldn't ever do it. I didn't want to end up an old lady with regrets as I looked back over my life." She glanced pointedly at her mother. Virginia leaned back in her seat and folded her arms across her ample bosom. "At least without that death machine, you'd have a chance at becoming an old woman." Gerald interrupted before his daughter could reply. "Well, I, for one, think it's great." Josephine blinked. "You do?" Her question was echoed by the other two women at the table. He nodded. "Yes, I do. Hell, I think of all the things I wished I'd done, but didn't, because I was scared or because somebody wouldn't let me." His wife sniffed. "Not that silly boat business again." He tapped his fist on the table. "Yes, damn it. That silly boat business, as you call it." Josephine's interest was piqued. "What boat?" Virginia sighed. "This is supposed to be my birthday dinner. Why are we talking about this stuff?" "There you go, changing the subject, just like you have for the last 30 years, every time I mentioned the word boat." His wife frowned at him. "Well, I guess you can be like your daughter then, and go get yourself that fishing boat and spend every darn weekend on the lake and leave your wife at home all alone. Is that what you would like?" "You know I offered to take you out with me, and you know I can't swim." Virginia's voice was shrill enough that other patrons turned to look at them. Josephine lifted both hands and made a placating gesture. "All right, kids, enough already. Yeah, Pops, Gram, let's not get all excited." They turned their attention to the dessert menu, but Josephine snuck surreptitious glances at all three of her loved ones. Her daughter was slyly checking her phone, most likely in the hope that Thomas had left her a voicemail message or a text, and her parents were both pouting like small children. She slapped her menu, startling everyone, including herself, with the loud noise it made. That's enough. I'm tired of the incessant arguing and hurt feelings over inconsequential matters. Angelica, call the man. Whatever you two fought over isn't worth this distance you've put between yourself. And if it truly is such a big deal, then maybe the two of you should put off the wedding until you can handle things like grown ups. She turned away from her daughter before she could offer a retort. Looking at her surprised parents, she said, "And you two, seriously, what is wrong with you? Why can't you be the example of long term wedded bliss that your granddaughter can look to for proof that marriage is a good thing? Lord knows I haven't been an example of that." Virginia laid her menu on the table. Affecting the voice, manner, and nickname from Josephine's childhood, her mother said, "Jojo, you know as well as everyone at this table that you didn't quit on your marriage or on your husband. He quit on you, and he quit on Angelica. You must stop beating yourself up over that, dear." Her father cleared his throat and waved away the approaching waitress. "Your mother's right. He left you. There was nothing wrong with him. There was something wrong with him, not with you. Put it behind you and leave it there." He placed a hand on his wife's arm and turned his attention to his granddaughter. "Married people fight. It comes with the territory. And sometimes, heck, most of the time, it's over stupid things." He moved his hand down Virginia's arm and grasped her hand with his large, shaky one. Immediately, the shakiness subsided. "But when it comes down to it, she's the best thing that ever happened to me. And because it would upset her, I never bought a boat." He gave his wife a sidelong, honorary look and added, "But don't think I haven't considered it every time she annoys me. Remember, she said she can't swim. I've often fantasized about taking her out for a one-way fishing trip." Virginia removed her hand from her husband's and swatted at him. "Gerald, you old pain in the ass, you." He laughed, and so did the others. Then Virginia turned to her granddaughter and said, "And I've often considered poisoning his daily coffee. But we're both still here because we work through our problems, or we decide that they're not really problems after all, and we move on. Do what your mother says and call him. Tell him to join us for dessert." Angelica hesitated, and Josephine could see that her sense of pride was waging a battle with her common sense. But finally, Angelica excused herself for the restroom and took her cell phone with her. After she walked off, Jo thanked her parents for helping to convince her daughter to stop acting so stubborn. Virginia laughed. "Well, the proverbial apple doesn't fall far from the tree now, does it?" She looked knowingly at Josephine. Jo smiled. "Nope, I guess not." She was quick to defend herself, though, and added, "But it wasn't my stubbornness that made Lloyd leave." Her mother put up her hand, palm outward. "Yes, dear, we know. No need to remind us." Josephine blushed and shook her head a little to clear her thoughts. Having been left 13 years ago for another woman would have been bad enough. But Lloyd realized a few years into their marriage that his tastes ran more toward men. So he packed his bags one fine day, left a short note, and ran off to Las Vegas. They got a quiet divorce, and he was a decent, if absent, father who regularly wired her money to care for Angelica. Once her daughter reached adulthood, the money stopped coming, and Josephine hadn't heard from him since then. She shrugged off the light depression that always settled upon her at any memory of Lloyd and the happiness they shared during those first years of marriage. Angelica rejoined them at the table, and Jo noticed that the pinched quality which had played around her daughter's lips earlier was now gone. Josephine raised her eyebrows in a silent question. Angelica smiled. "He's on his way." "Oh, good," Virginia said. "We'll wait until he gets here to order our dessert." "No," Angelica said. "I know what he likes. I'll order him something. This is your birthday, and we're not holding things up any more than they've already been. Besides, he won't be long. He's only a few blocks away. In fact, he said he was on the verge of calling me. He wasn't having a good time with his friends because he was feeling bad about our disagreement." "That's how it should be," Virginia said, and then she turned to Gerald for support, but his attention was fixed elsewhere. "Can we order now? I'm dying for a piece of blueberry pie or a peach cobbler, or maybe even one of those 7-layer chocolate things I saw the waiter take to that table over there." Gerald pointed off to his right. Angelica laughed and picked up a dessert menu. Josephine let out a sigh of relief, glad that there was peace in her daughter's world again and that the conversation had moved on to something other than her new motorcycle. Thanks for joining me.